The church bells tolled with a heaviness that seemed to seep into the marrow of my bones. Each strike was long and deliberate, echoing across the chapel like the sound of nails being driven into my heart. The polished wooden coffin at the front of the room glistened under the dim, honey-colored lights. It looked too perfect, too final, like the cruel period at the end of a sentence I wasn't ready to finish. If you're rewatching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how this. I sat stiffly in the second pew, clutching a damp tissue in my trembling hand, the fabric of my black dress clinging uncomfortably to my skin. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and roses, flowers that were meant to honor the dead, but to me smelled suffocating, like the perfume of grief itself. My eyes burned from the hours of tears I had shed, but still more threatened to fall. People shuffled past me with hushed voices and downcast eyes. Some pressed their hands gently to my shoulder, others leaned down to whisper condolences in my ear. "He was such a good man, Margaret. We're so sorry for your loss. Stay strong, dear." Their words barely registered. They were sounds, nothing more. Echoes of sympathy from people who had no idea how gutted I felt inside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that my life had been ripped apart, that my son was too young, too good, too full of promise to be lying cold in that coffin. But grief clamped my throat shut, trapping my voice like a bird in a cage. It was then, as I sat in the suffocating silence of mourning, that my phone buzzed. The sound was sharp and sudden, jolting me like a slap. For a moment I froze, ashamed to even consider checking my phone in the middle of my son's funeral. But something, some instinct I couldn't name, compelled me to slip it from my purse and tilt it toward me, shielding the screen with my hand. The message glowed on the screen in bright, unmistakable letters. "Mom, I'm alive. Don't trust my wife." At first I couldn't breathe. My lungs burned with the effort of pulling in air, my heart slamming against my ribcage as though trying to escape. My vision blurred, and I had to blink furiously to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I read the words again, my fingers numb around the device. "Mom, I'm alive. Don't trust my wife. No. Impossible. My son, my Danny, was in that coffin. I had kissed his forehead, cold as marble. I had sat beside the hospital bed when the doctors pronounced him dead. I had listened to the chaplain explain that God had called him home. And yet here it was, 3 short sentences that tore open everything I thought I knew. I wanted to believe it. God help me, I wanted to believe it with every fiber of my being. But logic screamed inside me, shouting words like scam and cruel trick. My fingers shook as I typed a response, my vision swimming through tears. "If this is really you, prove it." The reply came within seconds, fast and certain, as though the sender had been waiting for my challenge. "The night before I left, you found me in the kitchen eating cold lasagna from the pan," I said. "Don't tell Stephanie, she'll kill me." You laughed. The tissue slipped from my hand and landed soundlessly in my lap. The lasagna. That tiny, stupid moment of domestic humor. A secret between us. No one else knew. Not even Stephanie. A sob tore from my throat, though I quickly masked it as grief to those sitting around me. They nodded sympathetically, mistaking the raw emotion on my face for motherly loss, when in reality it was something far more complex. Relief. Terror. Hope. I lifted my gaze and looked toward Stephanie. She sat 2 pews ahead of me, her black veil draped perfectly over her glossy hair. Her posture was impeccable, her shoulders quivering with what, at first glance, looked like grief. She dabbed delicately at her eyes with a pristine white handkerchief, her performance worthy of a stage actress. And suddenly, as though a veil had lifted from my own eyes, I saw her for what she truly was. A liar. Her cries were too measured, her movements too deliberate, her grief too rehearsed. I stared at the back of Stephanie's head, every fiber of me vibrating with the urge to reach forward and rip the veil away, to expose her for what she was. But I forced myself to stay still. I couldn't let her know. Not yet. Her shoulders shook in perfectly timed sobs, her hand resting on the arm of her so-called friend beside her. She leaned just enough for people to see her grief, but not so much that she appeared weak. It was a performance, every detail carefully curated for the audience of mourners who whispered about her strength and composure. A part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to believe that she truly loved my son, that her grief was as raw as mine. But the message burned on my phone screen, searing the truth into my mind. Don't trust my wife. How long had she been lying to me? To him? To everyone? The priest's voice droned on, reciting prayers meant to soothe the grieving, but my ears could no longer process the words. My mind was a storm of questions and memories. Stephanie's sudden interest in Danny's finances. Her polite but persistent questions about my property in Colorado, the land my father had left me, rich with mineral rights I had never touched. The strange phone call she would step outside to take, always claiming they were business matters Danny wouldn't understand at the time. I had chalked it up to her ambition, her youthful drive. Now every puzzle piece shifted into place, forming a picture so sinister I could barely face it. When the service ended, people filed out of the pews, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor. I rose unsteadily, my knees trembling. Stephanie turned toward me, her face an exquisite mask of sorrow. She reached for my hands, clasping them warmly in hers. "We'll get through this together, Margaret," she said softly, her voice honey-sweet and dripping with false compassion that I swallowed hard, forcing my face into a mask of gratitude. "Yes, dear," I whispered, my voice trembling as though with grief, but inside my stomach turned. Her hands were warm, but I felt only the chill of betrayal that I wanted to scream at her, to demand where my son was, to accuse her of orchestrating this monstrous deception. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. One wrong move and she might vanish, taking Danny or the truth with her. That night, in the privacy of my bedroom, with the curtains drawn tight and the world hushed, I texted the number again. My fingers shook as I typed, afraid that at any moment the dream would collapse and I would wake to find it all a cruel hoax. "Danny, is it really you? Where are you?" The response came slowly this time, each word deliberate, heavy with meaning. "It's me, Mom. I can't say where I am. It's not safe. But you have to be careful. Stephanie isn't who you think she is." My throat closed. I pressed a trembling hand against my mouth, stifling the sob that clawed its way up. Relief, terror, disbelief, all tangled together until I could hardly tell where one ended and the other began. "What happened?" I typed, desperate for answers. The replies came in fragments, as though he were afraid to say too much at once. "She's working with people. Dangerous people. They want the property, the mineral rights. I had to disappear. They would have killed me otherwise." I sat frozen, my phone clutched like a lifeline. My mind reeled at the implications. Stephanie hadn't just betrayed Danny emotionally. She had trapped him in something much darker. Fraud. Conspiracy. Maybe even murder. I thought back to the coffin, the body I had seen, pale and still. If my son was alive, whose body had I kissed goodbye? The thought made bile rise in my throat. Was that part of her plan too? To plant a stranger in my son's place, counting on grief to blind me? The house was silent, yet I felt watched, as though the walls themselves had ears. I drew the curtains tighter, switched off the lights, and curled up in the dark with my phone clutched to my chest. My son was alive, but he was in danger, and so was I. The following morning, the house felt unbearably quiet. Grief had a way of muting the world, but now that grief was tangled with suspicion, every sound became amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall, the creak of the floorboards as I shifted in my chair. I sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. My phone lay beside it, face down, but my hand kept drifting toward it, as though afraid I might miss another message from Danny. My son. Alive. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. But with the thrill came questions. Endless, spiraling questions. How had Stephanie convinced everyone, including doctors, that Danny was dead? Had she bribed someone? Threatened them? Or worse? And the body? God help me, the body. Who had it belonged to? Someone unlucky enough to be caught in her web of lies? Someone she had sacrificed to maintain her illusion? I rubbed my temples, my mind aching with the weight of possibilities. Just then, the doorbell rang. The sharp chime jolted me upright. My pulse quickened. Few people visited me unannounced these days. Through the frosted glass pane, I saw the blurry silhouette of a woman. When I opened the door, there stood Stephanie, clutching a casserole dish like a trophy. "Hi, Margaret," she said softly, her voice syrupy sweet. Her eyes glistened, though I noticed her mascara was flawless, unsmudged. "I thought you might need some comfort food." The casserole dish was warm in my hands as I took it, its heat searing my palms. Comfort food. As though baked pasta could fill the cavern she had carved in my heart. "That's very kind of you," I said, Forcing my lips into something resembling gratitude, she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glancing around the kitchen with too much interest. Her gaze lingered on the table, the untouched coffee, the phone lying beside it. My breath hitched. Had she seen? Did she suspect I was in contact with Danny? She took a seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "It's been hard," she began, her tone practiced. "But I keep telling myself Danny wouldn't want us to give up. He'd want us to stay strong." I wanted to scream at her, to ask how she could say his name with such false tenderness when she was the very reason he had vanished. Instead, I nodded stiffly. "You're right," I murmured. "He was always so strong." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. For a fleeting second, I caught a glimpse of something else, calculation perhaps, or coldness. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask of the grieving widow. We sat in silence, the casserole dish cooling on the counter. Finally, she rose, smoothed her dress, and leaned forward to kiss my cheek. Her lips were cool, her perfume sharp and cloying. "We'll take care of each other, won't we?" she whispered. I managed a nod. Though bile churned in my stomach when she left, I collapsed into the nearest chair, shaking violently. I texted Danny immediately. She was here. She brought food. She's watching me, isn't she? The reply came minutes later. "Yes. Don't let her know you suspect anything. She has people watching both of us. Play along." My hands went cold, the phone slick in my grip. People watching me? My house, my life, infiltrated by invisible eyes? I felt suddenly exposed, as though the walls around me were made of glass. I wanted to pack a bag and run. But where would I go? And if they were truly watching, wouldn't that only confirm their suspicions? Instead, I forced myself to remain still, to breathe, to think. My son needed me, and if I was going to help him, I had to outplay her. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. Shadows stretched across the ceiling like grasping fingers. I lay curled on my side, my phone glowing softly in my hand, waiting for another message, another breadcrumb from my son. But the hours dragged on, silent and suffocating, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The love of a parent can transform into many things: grief, rage, desperation. Mine was transforming into something sharp, something dangerous. A determination I hadn't felt in years. Stephanie thought she had silenced my son. She thought she had fooled me. But she had underestimated one thing: the bond between a mother and her child. And I would use that bond like a weapon. By the third day after the funeral, exhaustion had sunk into my bones. Not the kind of exhaustion that sleep could cure, but the kind that came from carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear. My face ached from the mask of grief I wore for the outside world, while inside I juggled terror and hope in equal measure. Did I move through the motions of mourning, answering calls from distant relatives, accepting flowers, listening to well-wishers who spoke of my son in the past tense. Each "he was" stabbed me in the chest. "He is," I wanted to shout. "He is alive." But I said nothing. I couldn't. Late that evening, after the last visitor had left, I found myself pacing the living room, clutching the phone in my hand like a talisman. I needed more answers, more than cryptic warnings and fragments of truth. "Danny, please," I typed, my fingers trembling. "I need to understand. How did you survive? How did she make everyone believe you were dead?" Minutes stretched into eternity. At last, the screen lit up. "I can't tell you everything now. It's too dangerous. But she has friends in places you wouldn't believe. Money buys silence. Money buys bodies." My stomach lurched. Bodies. The coffin. The pale face I had kissed goodbye. A stranger, sacrificed to make the illusion convincing. My mind recoiled from the thought, but deep down I knew it was true. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked desperately. "We could have fought this together." The reply was slower this time, hesitant. "Because if they knew you were involved, they'd kill you too. I couldn't risk it." "Mom, promise me you'll act normal around her. Pretend you don't know. Act normal. Pretend." The words echoed in my head like a curse. I had never been a liar, not by nature. But for my son's sake, I would become one. The following afternoon, Stephanie called. Her voice was soft, tender, too carefully controlled. "Margaret, I was thinking we should go through Danny's belongings together. It might help with closure." Closure. The word made me want to scream. There could be no closure when the wound was still open, festering with lies. But I agreed, my voice steady though my insides twisted. Yes, dear. That sounds helpful. She arrived an hour later, dressed impeccably as always, her hair shining, her perfume sharp and lingering. Together, we entered Danny's old study. She moved with purpose, her hands gliding over his books, his trinkets, his photographs. To anyone else, she might have seemed like a grieving widow cherishing memories. But I watched her closely. Her eyes weren't soft with nostalgia. They were calculating, searching. At one point, she paused at his desk, pulling open drawers with too much interest. Her fingers rifled through papers, hesitating on envelopes, skimming documents. She thought I wasn't watching, but I was. And in that moment I knew this wasn't about closure. She was looking for something. I forced myself to smile. He always kept too many papers, I said lightly, masking the suspicion in my tone. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable, then offered a thin smile in return. Hours later, after she left, I sat in that same study, staring at the chaos she had left behind. I searched through the drawers myself, trying to see what she might have been after. But Danny had always been private about his finances, and whatever she sought was either gone or well hidden. That night, I texted him again. She went through your desk. What was she looking for? His reply came swiftly. Evidence. Don't let her find it. If she does, I'm finished. Cold dread washed over me. Evidence. Somewhere in this house there was something that could destroy Stephanie, or save my son, and she was hunting for it. Sleep evaded me entirely that night. I sat in the living room chair, staring at the shadows dancing on the walls, listening for the faintest creak that might signal danger. I was no longer simply a grieving mother. I had become a guardian of secrets, a reluctant player in a deadly game, and though fear gnawed at me, another feeling began to rise, fierce and unyielding, resolved that if my son's survival depended on me, then I would not falter. I would learn Stephanie's game piece by piece, and I would turn it against her. Because she thought I was weak. She thought I was blind, but she was wrong. The funeral might have been the beginning of her performance, but it was also the beginning of mine, and I was about to show her what a mother's love could truly do. The morning after Stephanie rifled through Danny's desk, I woke up with the weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't grief anymore, it was awareness. Awareness that the woman I had once trusted as my daughter-in-law had been playing me from the very beginning. Awareness that my son's life still hung by a thread. Awareness that if I didn't tread carefully, we would both be buried. Figuratively and perhaps literally, that I brewed my coffee with hands that shook less from age and more from the storm of thoughts swirling inside me. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The hiss of the kettle, the clink of the spoon against the mug, the faint creak of the floorboards as I moved from kitchen to living room. My once peaceful home, filled with books and memories, now felt like a stage for an invisible play where every move was being watched. I glanced at the phone lying on the counter. It had become both lifeline and torment. Messages from Danny reassured me of his existence, but they also pulled me deeper into the labyrinth of lies Stephanie had constructed. T9:12 am. The screen lit up. A new message. Don't let her suspect you know. She's dangerous, Mom. More dangerous than you think. I sank into the chair, my breath caught halfway in my throat. I already thought she was dangerous. What more could there be? What is she after? I typed back, my fingers stiff. A pause. Then his reply. Dad's property. The mineral rights. They're worth millions. She's not working alone. The room seemed to tilt. Of course, the land. My late husband had inherited it from his family, and though I'd never given much thought to its hidden value, Danny must have shared more with Stephanie than I realized. She had targeted him, married him, and now plotted to strip him of everything. But there was another word in his message that burned brighter than the rest. Alone. She wasn't working alone. Suddenly, the shadows in my home seemed darker, heavier. The comforting thought that danger was embodied in just one person shattered. Stephanie wasn't a solitary betrayer. She was part of a network, a conspiracy. I clutched the phone, my pulse drumming in my ears. Who else is involved? This time the reply came slower, halting. I don't know all their names, but I know they watch me. They want me to disappear permanently if I don't cooperate. That's why I staged my death. To buy time. But Mom, they're still out there. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my forehead like a prayer. My son had been forced into a nightmare I could barely comprehend, hunted by predators who wore familiar faces. The kettle clicked off again. I'd forgotten I had set it to reheat. The shrill sound jolted me back. I opened my eyes and stared at the kitchen window. Outside, the neighborhood looked the same. Children riding bikes, neighbors trimming hedges, a dog barking at a passing mailman. Ordinary life carried on, oblivious to the darkness creeping through mine. But I no longer had the luxury of being ordinary. That afternoon, Stephanie returned with what she claimed was kindness. "I thought you might want some company," she said, stepping into my home with a casserole dish. Her smile was warm, practiced, flawless. To anyone else, it would have been comforting. To me, it was the smile of a predator baring teeth behind a velvet curtain. I accepted the dish, thanking her, and invited her to sit. We sipped tea together in the living room, the air thick with unspoken truths. She asked about funeral arrangements, about Danny's friends, about whether I'd considered transferring ownership of the property, to keep things simple. That last question she disguised as innocent curiosity, but her eyes betrayed her. Sharp, glinting, measuring my reaction, that I smiled softly, keeping my voice calm. "I've thought about it, dear, but these are complicated matters. I wouldn't know where to begin." Her lips curved into sympathy, but her gaze lingered too long. I realized she was trying to gauge how pliable I might be, how easily I could be guided into signing away everything. We talked for another hour, a performance on both sides. When she finally left, I locked the door and collapsed onto the sofa. Trembling with the effort of restraint, I texted Danny again. "She wants me to sign over the property today," she asked directly. The reply was almost instant. "Don't sign anything. Promise me. Whatever happens, don't give her that land." I typed with fierce certainty. "I promise." But promises were only words. And against a web of criminals, words alone would not be enough. That night, lying awake, I began to realize that my role was shifting. No longer was I merely reacting to Stephanie's schemes. I would have to act. To protect my son, my family's legacy, and perhaps even others like us who had been ensnared by the same predators. The retired English teacher in me knew how stories worked. Villains thrived when heroes stayed passive. To defeat them, someone had to step onto the stage to change the narrative. And though I was 67, weary and afraid, the story now demanded that someone be me. The next morning, I dressed more carefully than usual. Not because I had plans, but because I needed armor. A pressed blouse, slacks without wrinkles, a touch of lipstick. Small details, but they gave me back a sliver of control. If Stephanie thought of me as a fragile, grieving woman, I intended to let her keep that illusion. But beneath the mask, I needed to remind myself that I was far from broken. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, the same kind I had once used for lesson plans. But instead of grammar rules and reading assignments, I began outlining what I knew. Danny was alive. Stephanie was not working alone. The target was Dad's property and mineral rights. There was evidence hidden somewhere. If Stephanie succeeded, Danny's survival would no longer matter. I stared at the list, the words heavy with consequence. For 42 years, I had guided students through Shakespeare's plays, teaching them how to spot foreshadowing, how to unravel motives, how to understand betrayal. Now, life had cast me in the same kind of story. Only this time, I wasn't analyzing characters from a distance. I was one of them. The irony was not lost on me. My husband, God rest him, had always said I lived too much in books. "The real world isn't a play, Margaret," he would tease. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps the world was nothing but a play, where masks concealed intentions and tragedies unfolded for those too blind to see the script. By afternoon, I had received no word from Danny. The silence was harder to bear than the lies. I busied myself with housework, sorting through closets, polishing silver, even dusting old photo albums. Anything to drown out the questions swirling in my head. Around 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I froze, dust rag still in my hand. My pulse raced. Visitors had become rare since the funeral, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I opened the door. It wasn't Stephanie this time. A man stood there, tall, clean-cut, in a gray suit that was just a little too sharp for our small town. His smile was thin, professional. "Mrs. Walsh." I nodded, my throat tight. "I represent an investment firm," he said smoothly. "I understand you've recently suffered a loss. I'm sorry for your grief." But I wondered if you'd considered selling certain assets to relieve the burden. My stomach dropped. This wasn't coincidence. What kind of assets? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Your late husband's property, he replied without hesitation. There are buyers very interested in the mineral rights. They'd pay handsomely, more than fair market value. I gripped the edge of the doorframe to steady myself. Stephanie's web was wider than I imagined. She wasn't just pushing me directly. She had allies, slick men in suits, ready to pressure me under the guise of business. I'm not interested, I said firmly. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. I understand this is difficult, Mrs. Walsh, but sometimes making practical decisions sooner rather than later saves trouble down the line. Would you like me to leave some paperwork? No, I said quickly, slamming the door harder than I intended. I stood there, chest heaving as the sound of his footsteps receded. When I finally dared to peek through the curtain, the man was walking to a black sedan parked at the curb. He got in, spoke briefly on a phone, and drove away. The phone in my hand trembled as I texted Danny. A man came to the house. Suit professional, wanted me to sell the land. Said he represents a firm. The reply came faster than I expected. Don't talk to him. Don't sign. Mom, they're tightening the circle. They'll try everything, threats, charm, pressure. It's not just Stephanie. It's bigger. Bigger. That word again. My stomach nodded. I typed. How big? His answer chilled me. National. Maybe international. They've done this to other families. I'm not their first victim. For several long minutes I couldn't breathe. My son's fake death, my husband's property, Stephanie's betrayal. None of it was an isolated tragedy. It was part of a pattern, a machinery designed to strip families of their legacies and leave them broken. And if what Danny said was true, then the law alone might not be enough. These were people who thrived in shadows, who manipulated paperwork and death certificates and marriage vows alike. They counted on silence, on fear, on the underestimation of people like me. I looked at the notebook on the kitchen table. My neat bullet points suddenly seemed inadequate. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was part of something vast, insidious, and organized. I pressed the pen harder against the paper and added a new line beneath the others. This is bigger than us. The pen nearly tore the page, but the act steadied me. That if Stephanie and her associates wanted me to be passive, grieving, and blind, then they had miscalculated. Because beneath their radar, a retired teacher had begun studying their script. And soon I intended to rewrite it. That night sleep came in snatches. I woke often, my ears straining for sounds in the dark. Each creak of the house, each rustle of branches against the window felt like an intruder's step. I clutched the phone to my chest like a lifeline, praying for a message from Danny. None came. At 3:17 a.m., I gave up on rest and padded into the kitchen, wrapping my robe tighter around me. The house smelled faintly of casserole, the one Stephanie had brought. I hadn't touched it. Something in me recoiled at the thought. Her food, her hands, her poison. I poured a glass of water, sat at the table, and forced myself to breathe slowly. Fear could consume me or it could sharpen me. I thought of my students over the years, their nervous eyes during exams, their fumbling attempts to answer questions about betrayal in Othello or revenge in Hamlet. I had always told them, fear is not the enemy. Fear is the lantern that shows you where the danger lies. I needed that lantern. In the stillness of the night, I began to sketch a plan. Not a complete one, just fragments like puzzle pieces scattered across the table. Keep Stephanie close but never trust her. Search the house for the evidence Danny mentioned. Gather information quietly. Every word she spoke, every name she dropped. Find someone outside the circle I could trust. That last point made my heart ache. Whom could I trust? My neighbors? No. Stephanie had eyes everywhere, and anyone could be compromised. The local police? Perhaps. But corruption was possible, and if her allies extended into law enforcement, one wrong move could doom Danny for good. For now, my trust would have to remain a scarce currency. By morning, I felt steadier. I made coffee, dressed, and decided to begin with point 2. Searching the house. That I started in the basement, moving boxes, opening trunks. Old holiday decorations, my husband's tools, stacks of Danny's childhood art projects. Nothing unusual. Then I moved upstairs, checking closets, drawers, even behind bookshelves. Hours passed, dust collected on my fingers, But I found nothing. Finally, in Danny's old room, I pulled open the nightstand drawer. Beneath a stack of comic books lay a slim leather notebook, its cover cracked with age. I opened it carefully. It wasn't a diary. It was records. Notes about meetings, strange names, addresses, dollar amounts scribbled in shorthand. Danny had been keeping track of something, maybe the very people now hunting him. My pulse quickened. This was it. This was the evidence. Then I heard it. A soft click. Not inside the house, outside. Near the front door. I froze, clutching the notebook to my chest. Slowly, silently, I crept to the window and peered through the curtain. A car sat across the street. Not unusual in itself, neighbors had visitors all the time. But this car had tinted windows, the engine running, the driver barely visible. And the way it was positioned. Not facing the house it was parked near, but angled toward mine. They were watching. I stepped back, my breath ragged. Had they seen me find the notebook? Was this coincidence, or had I just painted a target on my back? The phone buzzed in my hand, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. A message from Danny. "Mom, are you alone?" I typed quickly. "Yes, but someone's outside. A car. Watching." The dots appeared as he typed back. Then his message. "Don't let them know you've noticed. Pretend everything is normal. Hide what you found. Mom, please be careful." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to straighten my shoulders. Pretend everything is normal. The role of a lifetime. I tucked the notebook into an old shoebox, slid it beneath the bed, and forced my face into calmness. Then I walked deliberately into the kitchen, made myself a sandwich and sat by the window, directly in view of the car outside. If they were watching, they would see nothing but a woman eating lunch alone. Minutes crawled into an hour. Finally, the car's engine revved, and it drove away. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. Their departure didn't mean I was safe. It meant they had confirmed what they wanted to know, that I was here, vulnerable, predictable. I pressed my palm against the cool window glass and whispered to the empty street, "You underestimate me." And for the first time I realized I almost believed it. The following day, sunlight streamed through the curtains, but its warmth didn't reach me. My nerves still hummed from the previous night's encounter. That car, that silent observer, had stripped away any illusions I had left about this being a small, manageable deception. This was calculated, coordinated surveillance. I couldn't afford mistakes. After breakfast, I pulled the shoebox from under the bed and examined the notebook again. Every page was filled with fragments, cryptic initials, numbers, addresses written half in code. But the most alarming entries were dates. Dates that aligned with key events. The sudden illness of a wealthy local businessman, the foreclosure of a neighbor's land, the sale of another family's mineral rights. The pattern was undeniable. This was a machine of exploitation, and my family was just its latest target. I ran my fingers over Danny's handwriting, tears stinging my eyes. He must have been documenting everything, knowing one day it would all collapse. My son hadn't been careless. He'd been courageous. And now it was up to me to carry the torch. Still, courage was easier to admire on paper than to summon in the flesh. I felt the weight of my age in my bones, the loneliness of standing against something vast and merciless. I longed to pick up the phone and call someone, anyone, for help. But whom? I thought of my friend Caroline, who had sat with me during the wake, her hand steady on mine. She had always been loyal, discreet. But dragging her into this could destroy her life. No, I couldn't. The police? The thought circled back like a vulture. If Stephanie's allies were truly embedded in institutions, reporting prematurely could mean the notebook vanished and Danny's life snuffed out for real. So for now, the only person I could trust was the one sending me desperate texts from the shadows. I sent him a picture of a page in the notebook. "Is this what you meant by evidence?" The reply came quickly, the urgency practically vibrating through the words. "Yes, that's it. That's what they're after. Mom, you can't let them get it. Promise me." I typed back, "I promise. But Danny, what do I do with it?" A pause. Then, "Keep it hidden. Move it often. Never let it stay in the same place. They'll search, I know they will. And don't let her see you with it." The thought of Stephanie rifling through my drawers while I slept made bile rise in my throat. But he was right. They would come looking. I needed decoys. That afternoon I drove into town, keeping my movements as routine as possible. To anyone watching, it looked like I was running errands. groceries, pharmacy, a stop at the post office. But in truth, I was building layers of protection. I bought 2 extra notebooks identical in size and shape to Danny's, filled them with nonsense. Recipes copied from magazines, gardening tips, half-finished crossword puzzles, decoys to plant in obvious places. The real notebook I wrapped in aluminum foil, sealed in a plastic bag, and slid into the hollow cavity of an old vacuum cleaner in the basement. They could turn the house upside down, and they still wouldn't find it. For now, when I returned home, Stephanie was waiting on the porch, her smile as bright and poisonous as ever. "Margaret." I was worried. "You didn't tell me you'd be out." I forced a smile, clutching the grocery bags tighter. "Just errands, dear. Needed to keep busy." Her eyes flicked to the bags, then back to me. "Of course. That's good. Keeping your mind occupied." The words sounded kind, but I heard the undercurrent. "I'm keeping track of you." We chatted briefly, the dance continuing as always. Her feigned concern, my polite mask. But when she finally left, I felt the hairs on my arms rise. She knew. Maybe not about the notebook yet, but about something. My absence, my errands, my refusal to remain predictable. Something had unsettled her. That night, as I sat in the living room with the curtains drawn tight, the phone buzzed again. "Mom, you're being watched more closely now. I can feel it. Don't slip. Please." I stared at the screen, my throat tight. My son's words were both a warning and a plea. And for the first time, I realized the gravity of the stage I had stepped onto. This wasn't just about land or money. It wasn't just about saving him. It was about standing against something that thrived on fear and silence. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the darkness, "I won't slip. I can't." Because in stories, the moment you give in is the moment the villain wins. And I refused to let their story end with mine. The days after I hid the notebook settled into a tense rhythm. Every morning I woke with the same thought. Is today the day they come for me? The fear never dulled. But neither did my resolve that I spent hours pretending to live normally. I tended to the garden, baked bread, made polite conversation with neighbors. But beneath the surface I was cataloging everything. The strange car parked too long at the corner. The unfamiliar woman walking her dog who never let the leash slacken near my house. Even the mail, too neatly stacked, too precisely folded, felt like it had passed through hands that weren't my carriers. I had taught literature for decades, drilling into my students that details matter. In Shakespeare, a dropped handkerchief could spark murder. In Dickens, a forgotten will could change a family's fate. And here, in my real life, every detail might mean the difference between survival and ruin. That on Wednesday afternoon, Stephanie returned. She breezed into my house without knocking, carrying a basket of muffins. "I thought you might like these," she said sweetly, setting them on the counter. "You've been so strong, Margaret. But you shouldn't isolate yourself." I smiled thinly. "Thank you, dear. You're very kind." But my eyes studied her carefully. Her hair was freshly styled, her blouse expensive. She looked less like a grieving widow and more like a woman preparing for a meeting. As she poured us tea, I asked casually, "Have you been busy lately?" She hesitated just for a second before answering, "Oh, just errands. Trying to keep moving, you know." Practiced answer. Too smooth. We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea. I let the quiet stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I leaned forward. "Stephanie," I said softly, "you've always been like a daughter to me. I hope you know that." Her eyes flicked to mine, cautious, calculating. "Of course, Margaret. I love you. I loved Danny." I held her gaze, searching for cracks in the mask. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw something. Fear? Guilt? No. Control. She had rehearsed this role, and she wore it flawlessly, but I had learned something in that pause. She didn't expect me to confront her with warmth. She was ready for anger, suspicion, even tears, but not affection. That meant emotion, genuine or feigned, could be my weapon. After she left, I sat in the kitchen, heart pounding. The performance was exhausting but necessary. She believed she was leading me, but little by little, I could shift the stage beneath her feet. That night, Danny finally messaged again. "Have you told her anything?" "No," I replied. "But she came today. I think she's nervous. She's hiding something." "Good. Keep her nervous. If she feels in control, we're done. But don't push too hard. They're watching for slips." I stared at the phone, my chest tight. My son was alive, guiding me, but I hated the thought of him out there, hunted, afraid. I wanted to hold him, to tell him it would be all right. Instead, all I could do was play my part in this twisted drama. The next morning I received a call. Unknown number. My stomach lurched. I almost didn't answer, but instinct made me press the phone to my ear. Mrs. Walsh. A male voice, smooth, professional. We spoke briefly the other day. About your property. I gripped the receiver tighter. The man from the black sedan. I told you I'm not interested, I said firmly. Yes, he replied, unbothered. But circumstances change. I'd hate for you to face unnecessary complications. Sometimes holding on to something too long creates problems. It wasn't a threat. Not directly. But the implication chilled me. I'll think about it. I lied and hung up before he could answer. That I stood in the silence of my kitchen, trembling. The walls of my home, once my sanctuary, now felt like the edges of a trap closing in. I scribbled a new line in the notebook where I tracked everything. They won't stop asking. Pressure is escalating. The pattern was clear. First gentle offers, then persistent visits. Next would come intimidation. And if that failed, I dared not finish the thought. That I closed the book, took a deep breath and whispered into the empty room. I have to stay ahead. Just a little longer. Because if literature had taught me anything, it was this: villains always tighten the noose too quickly. And when they did, I would be ready to slip free. The following Sunday, the church bells rang as usual, their echo drifting across town. I walked to service slowly, each step deliberate, trying to look like the grieving widow everyone believed me to be. Inside, the pews were full. Whispers followed me as they always did: pity, admiration, curiosity. She's so strong. Poor woman, losing both husband and son. Stephanie's been such a help to her. They spoke as though I couldn't hear, as though I were already half gone myself. But I did hear every word, and I filed it away. The community trusted Stephanie. That was her strongest shield. If I accused her now, no one would believe me. Pastor Evans gave a sermon about truth and deception, about wolves in sheep's clothing. His words might have been coincidence, but I felt them aimed directly at me. When the congregation bowed their heads, I kept my eyes open, scanning the faces, the corners of the room, every shadow where danger might lurk. After service, Stephanie appeared at my side, slipping her arm through mine as if we were family. Margaret, you shouldn't be alone today. Come have lunch with me. I forced a smile. That's very sweet, dear, but I'm tired. Perhaps another time. Her grip tightened for a second before she let go. She wanted control, and my refusal unsettled her. I savored that tiny victory. That evening I called Marcus. His voice was warm but wary. You're playing a dangerous game, Margaret. Are you sure you can keep this up? I don't have a choice, I said firmly. If I give them what they want, they'll bleed us dry. If I do nothing, they'll keep circling until they find a weakness. I have to outthink them. You're not a cop, he reminded me. No, I agreed. I'm a teacher. And teachers survive by anticipating every trick their students might pull. These people think they're clever. They're just overconfident. He chuckled softly. You've always had a way with perspective. All right. If you're determined, I'll help however I can. But promise me something. If it gets too dangerous, you call the sheriff. I promised, though we both knew it was a lie. In my heart I understood. By the time I called law enforcement, it might already be too late. 2 nights later, I caught Stephanie in my house. It was just after sunset. I'd gone out to bring in the laundry, and when I returned, the kitchen door was slightly ajar. My breath caught. Slowly, I stepped inside. She was standing by my cabinet, pretending to straighten dishes. Oh, Margaret, she exclaimed brightly, as though nothing were amiss. I thought I'd surprise you with dinner. I let myself in. My heart pounded, but I kept my expression calm. How thoughtful, I said evenly. Next time, though, please knock. Old women like me startle easily. Her smile faltered just for a heartbeat. Then she recovered. Of course. Forgive me. We ate together, her chatter light and meaningless. But I knew why she had come. She was searching. Maybe for the notebook, maybe for something else. She wanted assurance that I was still the vulnerable, grieving woman she could control. After she left, I locked every door and window, then sat in the dark, shaking. For the first time, the danger pressed against me like a physical weight. If she could enter my home so easily, what was stopping her from coming back with others? I messaged Danny. She came into the house tonight. The reply was immediate. Mom, that's not safe. You need to leave. No, I typed back. If I leave, they win. I can't run. Not yet. I stared at the phone long after the conversation ended. My son wanted me safe, hidden. But I couldn't abandon him. Not when his life and everything his father left us was at stake. The following morning, I devised a new plan. If Stephanie wanted to play her role, I would give her the perfect stage. I invited her to tea again, deliberately leaving papers scattered on the table, old property records, tax documents, things that looked important but meant nothing. She arrived, saw the clutter, and her eyes lit up with hunger she couldn't hide. As we drank, I pretended to be distracted, even careless. I spoke of how overwhelming the finances were, how I wished someone could just take it all off my hands. I watched her carefully. Her mask slipped just slightly, an eagerness she couldn't conceal. Oh, Margaret, she said soothingly. You shouldn't burden yourself with all this. Let me help you. That's what family is for. Her words confirmed everything I already knew. She wanted my property. She wanted control. And she believed she was close to having it. I smiled faintly, playing the fool. You're right, dear. Maybe I'll let you help after all. Inside, my heart hardened. I would let her think she was winning. I would let her believe I was the naive old woman she expected. And when the time came, I would turn her own confidence into the trap that destroyed her. That night, I made another entry in my notebook. The stage is set. Let her think I'm weak. That's how I'll win. The storm broke on Thursday night. I had been grading old essays, my attempt at clinging to the familiar, when the power flickered. The lights dimmed, came back, then went dark completely. Silence filled the house, broken only by the tick of the clock on the wall. My first thought was the weather. But when I peered outside, the street lamps glowed steadily, and my neighbor's windows shone with warm light. Only my house was dark. They had cut the power. I froze, every nerve on edge. The old instincts of survival, ones I never thought I'd need, screamed at me. Don't move. Don't show fear. A shadow crossed the yard. Then another. I retreated silently to the hallway, clutching the notebook like a weapon. It was foolish, I knew, but it grounded me. I slipped into the guest room. Peering through the curtains, two men stood by the fence, whispering. One pointed toward the back door. My heart pounded so hard I thought they'd hear it. I backed away slowly, mind racing. I couldn't call the police, not yet. Without proof, they'd brush it off as paranoia. I needed them to reveal themselves fully, to cross a line they couldn't retreat from. The phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Danny. Are you safe? I heard they're escalating. Stay calm. Whatever happens, don't let them corner you. I didn't reply. Instead, I moved through the darkened house, every step rehearsed in silence. I lit a single candle and placed it in the window, as if signaling surrender. Then I sat at the kitchen table, the picture of helplessness. Minutes later, the back door creaked open. Two figures entered, their faces obscured by caps pulled low. One carried a flashlight, sweeping it across the room. The beam landed on me. Mrs. Walsh, the taller one said smoothly. We didn't mean to startle you. Just wanted to check on you. Thought maybe you needed help. My voice trembled deliberately. The power went out. I didn't know what to do. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what we're here for. You shouldn't be alone in times like this. They sat across from me, uninvited. The shorter one pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. We need you to sign these, Mrs. Walsh. Just routine documents to keep everything in order. Stephanie said you'd understand. My hand shook as I opened the folder. Inside were transfer papers, neat and official, designed to strip me of everything. I let my lip tremble. I don't know. It all looks so complicated. That's why we're here, the taller man coaxed. To make it simple. Sign tonight, and you won't have to worry anymore. I glanced at the candle, watching the flame flicker. My fear was real, but beneath it, a sharper clarity cut through. They had made a mistake. By entering my home uninvited, by handing me fraudulent documents, they had crossed into undeniable criminality. I forced myself to stall. Maybe I should ask Marcus. He's good with paperwork. The shorter man's smile hardened. No need for lawyers. This is a family matter. I nodded slowly, feigning defeat. All right. Let me just get a pen. I rose shakily, walking to the counter where my phone lay hidden beneath a stack of bills. My fingers brushed it as I pretended to search for a pen. With one swift motion, I pressed the emergency code Marcus had taught me, a silent alert to his office that flagged immediate danger. When I returned, pen in hand, I lowered myself back into the chair. My hands hovered over the papers. Where do I sign? The taller man pointed eagerly. Right there at the bottom. I lowered the pen, heart hammering, but before the tip touched paper, I let it slip from my grasp. It clattered to the floor. Oh dear, clumsy me, I muttered, bending slowly to retrieve it. As I straightened, I caught sight of headlights sweeping across the front lawn. The men didn't notice. Moments later, heavy knocks rattled the door. Sheriff's Department. Open up. The two men bolted to their feet, panic flashing across their faces. One cursed under his breath. The other shoved the folder back into his bag. I sat frozen, wide-eyed, the very image of a terrified widow. What's happening? I whispered. Nothing, the taller man snapped. Stay quiet. We'll handle it. But they didn't handle it. Within seconds, uniformed officers stormed inside, weapons drawn, voices sharp and commanding. Hands where we can see them. Now. The men hesitated, then raised their hands reluctantly. Relief flooded me so hard my knees nearly buckled. The sheriff himself entered, his face grim. He glanced at me, then at the intruders. Mrs. Walsh, are you all right? I nodded shakily. They wanted me to sign papers. The officers confiscated the folder. As they were led away in handcuffs, one of the men shot me a look of pure venom. This isn't over, old woman. The sheriff's hand settled gently on my shoulder. Don't worry. We'll get to the bottom of this. But you need to be careful, Margaret. These people are dangerous. Dangerous. The word echoed in my mind long after the house was empty again that night. I sat by the candle, staring at the flickering flame until dawn. The game had escalated. The masks were slipping. And for the first time I realized just how far I was willing to go to protect my son. Because if they thought I was just a grieving widow, they were about to learn the truth. I was far more dangerous than they ever imagined. Sleep eluded me after the break-in. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the shutters felt like a warning. But beneath the fear was something sharper, steadier, resolve. For weeks I had been reacting, grieving, hiding, pretending. Now it was time to act. The sheriff's raid had rattled their pawns, but not the queen. Stephanie was still moving freely, still orchestrating in the background, her hands clean while others took the risks. She thought herself untouchable. But no one is untouchable. The next morning I called Marcus. My voice was firm, steadier than I felt. They tried to force me to sign last night. The sheriff intervened. Jesus, Margaret, he muttered. Are you hurt? No. But it's only going to escalate. We need to turn this around. I want to set a trap they can't escape. He was quiet for a moment. You're talking about deception. Legal misdirection. Call it what you want, I said. They've been using lies against us. I intend to use the truth against them. He sighed heavily, but I heard admiration beneath his concern. All right. I'll draft something. But Margaret, if you go down this road you have to commit completely. No wavering. I taught Shakespeare for 42 years, Marcus. I know a thing or two about tragic flaws. Overconfidence will be theirs. We arranged to meet the next day at his office. That evening Stephanie returned, her expression unusually sharp. No muffins this time, no sweet act. She stood in my doorway like a landlord inspecting her tenant. I heard there was trouble last night, she said carefully. I tilted my head. Trouble? Police at your house. Some men arrested. Her eyes searched mine for weakness. You must have been terrified. I forced a nervous laugh. Yes, quite. But the sheriff said it was probably just a misunderstanding. Salesman, perhaps. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't believe me, but she couldn't press without revealing too much. Margaret, she said, her tone softening. You've been under so much strain. Maybe you should let me handle things. I can take this burden off your shoulders. There it was. The pitch, spoken aloud at last, that I looked down, letting silence stretch. Then I whispered, "Maybe you're right. I don't think I can keep up much longer." Her smile returned, bright and false. "Good. Trust me, everything will be fine." After she left, I collapsed into the chair, shaking. The performance was exhausting, but it worked. She believed I was folding. The next day I met Marcus in his office. He spread a stack of documents across the desk. "These look like exactly what she wants. Property transfers, insurance forms, mineral rights agreements. But every page contains clauses that turn them into confessions. Once they sign, they'll have legally admitted to fraud, conspiracy, and extortion." I stared at the papers, all mixing with dread. "Will it hold in court?" He nodded. "Ironclad. If they sign, they've trapped themselves. If they refuse, you still keep control." I touched the pages with trembling hands. They felt heavier than paper. They felt like weapons. "Margaret," Marcus said gently, "you're walking into a battlefield. Are you ready for that?" I looked him in the eye. "I've lived through grief. I've buried a husband. I've stood at my son's funeral, thinking him dead. I'm more than ready." That night I rehearsed my lines. Every tremble, every sigh, every carefully placed word of weakness. I studied myself in the mirror, crafting the role of the frail, frightened widow. The mask I would wear to lure them in. Because soon, very soon, Stephanie and her associates would believe they had won. They would believe I had surrendered. And at that very moment, the trap would close. I made one final entry in my notebook before closing it for good. The play is set. Act 3 ends. The climax begins. I slid the notebook into the drawer, turned out the light, and for the first time since this began, I slept soundly. Not because I felt safe, but because I finally had control. The morning of the meeting dawned gray and heavy, clouds pressing low against the rooftops. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. I dressed with care, choosing a modest black dress, one I had worn countless Sundays to church. It hung loosely on my frame, emphasizing frailty. My hair I pinned back simply, no makeup, just pale skin and tired eyes. If Stephanie expected a beaten widow, she would see one. I tucked the forged documents, Marcus's clever creations, into a plain envelope and slid it into my handbag. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from anticipation. Today the game shifted. At 8:10 sharp, Stephanie arrived at my door. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her pearls gleaming, her perfume wafting ahead of her like a declaration of superiority. Her smile was bright, practiced, predatory. "Margaret," she cooed, "you look so weary, dear. You shouldn't have to deal with all this paperwork." I lowered my gaze, let my shoulders sag. "You're right, Stephanie. I can't do it anymore. I need help." Her eyes flickered with triumph. She thought she had won. We sat at the dining table, sunlight filtering weakly through lace curtains. I placed the envelope between us, sliding it across the polished wood. "Marcus prepared these for me," he said. "He said they'd make things easier. Would you look them over?" "I don't understand them." Stephanie's eyes gleamed. She opened the envelope with delicate fingers, pulling out the stack. Her gaze devoured the words, scanning for what she craved. Control. Ownership. "These are good," she murmured, masking her excitement. "Very good. If you sign these, everything will transfer smoothly. You'll never have to worry again." I let my lip tremble. Will you take care of me, Stephanie? After it's done?" Her smile widened. "Of course, dear. You'll have nothing to fear." In that moment I saw it all. Her hunger, her calculation, the satisfaction of believing she had broken me. I almost pitied her. Almost. But I kept playing my role. Perhaps we shouldn't rush. Maybe give me a few more days." Her eyes hardened, the mask slipping. "Margaret, you've suffered enough. Don't drag this out. The sooner it's settled, the sooner you can rest." There it was, pressure, urgency. She wanted it done now, before doubt could grow. I nodded slowly, feigning surrender. "All right. I'll sign tonight. Come back after supper, and I'll be ready." Her smile returned, victorious. "Wonderful. I'll bring witnesses. Just to make it official." As she left, I closed the door gently behind her, my hand tightening on the knob until my knuckles whitened. Witnesses. She was confident, reckless. She had no idea she was walking into her own ruin. That afternoon I called Marcus. She's bringing people tonight. She expects me to sign. Perfect, he said. We'll be ready. Do you want me there? No, I said firmly. If she sees you, she'll be suspicious. I need her to believe it's just me. But keep the sheriff on alert. When I give the signal, he moves. Marcus hesitated, then sighed. You've grown frighteningly good at this, Margaret. I smiled faintly. Grief sharpens the mind. It cuts away everything unnecessary. Evening came too quickly. I lit candles in the dining room, arranging the table as if for guests. A decanter of sherry, crystal glasses, fresh flowers in a vase. Hospitality cloaking the battlefield, T7. A knock rattled the door. Stephanie entered with two men I didn't recognize, both broad-shouldered, both carrying leather briefcases. Her chosen witnesses, no doubt. Margaret, she said warmly, these gentlemen are here to help us finalize things. Isn't that wonderful? I forced a weak smile. Yes, wonderful. We sat. Papers were laid out. Pens uncapped. The men positioned themselves like guards, their eyes on me more than the documents. Stephanie leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet. Just here, dear. A few signatures and all your worries will disappear. My hand hovered over the paper, pen poised. My heart thundered, each beat echoing like a drum of war. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I looked up, meeting Stephanie's eyes, and for the first time, I let her see the steel beneath the frailty. Do you know what the thing about plays is, Stephanie? I asked softly. She blinked, thrown off. Plays. They always end in one of two ways. Comedy or tragedy. And the actors never realize which one they're in until it's too late. Confusion flickered across her face. Then irritation. Margaret, sign the papers. I set the pen down deliberately. No, the room froze. The men shifted uneasily. Stephanie's smile faltered. What did you say? I leaned back, folding my hands calmly. I said no. And I believe the sheriff will be very interested to see the documents you've just placed in front of me. Before she could react, I pressed the small device hidden in my pocket. The signal Marcus had arranged outside, engines roared. Doors slammed. Voices barked commands. Stephanie's face drained of color as the front door burst open and officers swarmed the room. This is a sting, one of them shouted. Hands on the table now. The men cursed, shoving back their chairs. Stephanie's composure shattered. Panic breaking through the polished mask, I sat perfectly still, calm in the chaos. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt powerful. Because this wasn't their stage anymore. It was mine. The room erupted in chaos. Chairs scraped violently against the hardwood as the two men lunged for their briefcases, but they didn't get far. Officers in tactical gear swarmed them, shoving them face down on the table, twisting arms behind backs with the efficiency of men who had done this 100 times before. Stephanie stood frozen, her eyes wide, lips parted in disbelief. For the first time since I had known her, she had no words. Stephanie Walsh. The sheriff's commanding voice filled the room as he stepped inside. You are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted extortion. Her head snapped toward me, and in that instant I saw the truth. Rage, betrayal, a desperate plea for control she no longer had. You, she hissed. You set me up. I met her fury with calm.
No, Stephanie.
You set yourself up the moment you underestimated me. The officers pulled her arms behind her back, the metallic click of handcuffs punctuating her fall from power. She struggled, cursing, her once pristine elegance reduced to animalistic panic. The men shouted protests, claims of innocence, half-baked excuses. None of it mattered. Evidence sat in neat stacks on the table, signed with their own hands, their own hubris. Sheriff Bradley crossed to me, his expression both stern and respectful. Mrs. Walsh, are you all right? I nodded slowly, though my hands trembled. Not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming release of tension I had carried for days.
I'm fine, Sheriff.
Better than I've been in a long time. Behind him, Stephanie spat venom. You think this will save you? You think you've won? You're nothing but a lonely old woman. Without me, your son would be dead already. Her words cut, sharp and vicious, but I refused to let them pierce deeper than the surface. I rose, smoothing the front of my dress, and looked her straight in the eyes. My son is alive despite you, I said firmly. And he will stay alive because you are finished. Her face twisted, a grotesque mask of fury, before the officers dragged her toward the door. The men followed. Their protests drowned by the clatter of boots and radio chatter, silence fell. The dining room, once tense with manipulation, now felt like sacred ground. The flowers still stood fresh, the sherry untouched, the documents scattered like remnants of a battle. I sank back into my chair, my body suddenly heavy. Months of grief, fear, and suspicion pressed down all at once, demanding release. My breath came in shudders, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. Sheriff Bradley placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Margaret. Better than good. You saved lives tonight." I looked at him, the edges of my vision blurred by unshed tears. "Do you think it's really over?" He hesitated, then nodded. "For them, yes. For you and your son, it's the beginning of something new." The word settled in me like a seed planted in fertile soil. A beginning. After all that had ended, perhaps there was room for something to start. The officers cleared the room, carrying evidence, securing the scene. I was left in the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the ghosts of the battle I had just won. I walked to the window, watching as squad cars pulled away, their red and blue lights flashing against the night. Stephanie's face flashed briefly in one of the back seats, a pale mask behind the glass, her mouth moving in silent curses I would never hear. For years, she had fooled us. For months, she had controlled us. For days, she had stalked us. And in one night, she was undone by her own arrogance. The house felt too quiet after the last car left. I wandered through the rooms, touching familiar things, the photographs on the mantel, the worn armrest of my favorite chair, the books stacked neatly by the bedside. Everything the same, yet irrevocably changed. I paused at Danny's photograph, the one from his high school graduation. His smile was bright, his eyes full of promise. My chest ached with the memory of that innocence, now scarred by betrayal. But he was alive. And because of that, all of this had been worth it. I picked up the phone and dialed his number with trembling fingers. "Mom." His voice was tight, cautious. "It's over," I whispered. "They're gone. You can come home." A pause, then a shaky exhale of relief. "I don't know how you did it." "Neither do I admitted softly. "But I did." When I hung up, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about saving my son. It wasn't even about protecting property or catching criminals. It was about reclaiming myself. For too long, I had allowed others to define me: wife, mother, widow, victim. Tonight, I had written a new definition: survivor, strategist, protector. I poured myself a glass of sherry, finally breaking the seal, and raised it toward the empty chair where my late husband used to sit. "For you," I whispered, "and for the son you left behind." The liquor burned warm down my throat, grounding me in the present. Tomorrow would bring questions, paperwork, investigations. But tonight, I allowed myself the rare luxury of victory. I blew out the candles one by one, plunging the room into shadow, and carried myself to bed. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep, dreamless, and unbroken. For the first time in months, I rested without fear. And when the dawn came, bright and golden, I rose with a new kind of strength humming in my veins. The battle was over. But the war for my son's healing, and perhaps my own, was just beginning. Margaret leaned back in her chair, feeling the tension finally begin to lift as the police operation unfolded below. From her vantage point on the hill, she could see the warehouse surrounded by tactical teams and unmarked SUVs, their lights sweeping over the lot in methodical arcs. It was a sight she never imagined herself witnessing. Law enforcement moving with precision, yet all because of her careful orchestration. Her mind replayed every step from the diner, each decision that had led them here, the documents, the strategic lies, the subtle nudges that kept Stephanie and David unaware of the trap they'd walked into. Danny sat in the car beside her, eyes wide, still processing the enormity of what had happened. "Mom," he said quietly, "I can't believe you actually pulled this off. I thought they had us." His voice cracked, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Margaret reached over, gripping his hand tightly. "Sweetheart," she said, "sometimes people underestimate you, and that underestimation is the greatest weapon you have." The minutes stretched as they watched the suspects emerge one by one, hands raised, expressions caught somewhere between shock and resignation. Margaret recognized each face, the same faces that had haunted her and her son for weeks. Seeing them in the light of justice, stripped of pretense, gave her a deep, almost surprising sense of satisfaction. It wasn't vindictive, it was the calm assurance that right had, finally, prevailed. Her phone buzzed, Marcus' name flashing across the screen. She answered immediately. "Everything in motion?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "All in place," Marcus replied, a note of quiet pride in his tone. "The FBI confirms federal jurisdiction triggered. Your documents are airtight, Margaret. Nobody walks away from this without consequences." She exhaled slowly, leaning back against the seat. Marcus had been brilliant, weaving subtle legal traps into what looked like straightforward property transfers. They were cunning, yes, but she had been several steps ahead. Danny turned to her. "So it's really over?" His voice carried a blend of hope and disbelief. Margaret smiled gently. "For now," she said. "Stephanie and her associates are in custody. The property is safe. And most importantly, you're safe." For a moment they sat in silence, watching as the last of the criminals were guided into vehicles by the authorities. It was a surreal tableau, the culmination of weeks of fear, strategy, and quiet resolve. Margaret had felt powerless at times, nearly crushed under the weight of the schemes against her family, but tonight she realized how capable she truly was. The call from Sheriff Bradley came next. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm but with unmistakable approval, "they're all secured. We have confessions, your evidence, and several other linked cases across multiple states. You've helped us prevent dozens of future crimes." Margaret smiled faintly. "Thank you, Tom. I couldn't have done it without you." She glanced at Danny, who was trying to absorb the enormity of their survival and triumph. Back at home later that night, Margaret brewed coffee and sat across from Danny at the kitchen table. "You did incredible things, Mom," Danny said softly. "I still can't believe this all worked." Margaret leaned back, letting herself savor the small domestic normalcy after days of tension. "It's about thinking strategically," she said. "About seeing the gaps others leave open because they underestimate you. You can't always rely on luck. Sometimes you have to manufacture it." Danny nodded, eyes thoughtful. "I know I have a lot to process. Everything feels different now." Margaret reached across, resting her hand over his. "It's normal. You've learned what it means to protect yourself, to trust carefully, and to rely on your instincts. That's the true lesson here." The next days were a blur of legal proceedings and federal investigations. Margaret worked closely with the authorities, providing statements and clarifying the nuances of her documents. Each session reinforced just how delicate her plan had been, how a single misstep could have sent the entire operation into chaos. But she had been meticulous, patient, and unwavering. Meanwhile, Danny began the slow process of reclaiming his life. Trust, once fractured, was being rebuilt carefully, brick by brick. He resumed work, reconnected with friends who had been kept at a distance by Stephanie's manipulation, and began speaking openly about the experience, not out of shame, but as a testimony to resilience. Margaret watched him with pride. The boy who had once trusted too easily had grown into a man capable of discernment and courage. Margaret herself didn't return immediately to her old routine. She allowed herself time to reflect, to consider the power she had discovered within herself. Volunteering at the library was comforting, yes, but there was a new fire, a drive to use her skills to help others avoid the pitfalls she and Danny had faced. She reached out to local senior centers, offering seminars on protecting assets, recognizing scams, and the importance of legal literacy. The response was overwhelming. People were eager to learn, eager to reclaim some control over their financial security. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the federal prosecutor handling Stephanie's case. Margaret opened it carefully, a sense of anticipation and satisfaction building. The letter detailed the charges: 23 felonies across 6 states, evidence linking Stephanie and her associates to multiple fraud schemes targeting elderly victims. Assets recovered totaled over $40 million. Margaret read through the pages, each one confirming the impact of her actions, not just for herself and Danny, but for countless other families who would never fall victim to these criminals. She reflected on the irony of it all. A retired English teacher, underestimated, overlooked, had orchestrated a takedown that spanned states and involved some of the most careful, cunning criminals she had ever faced. Her strategy had relied on intellect, patience, and the willingness to anticipate every possible move of her adversaries. The documents Marcus had crafted had been a masterstroke, and she had executed the plan flawlessly. Danny entered the room quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Mom," he said, placing one in front of her. "I just want to say thank you for everything." Margaret smiled, accepting the warmth of the mug. "We did it together," she said softly. "You played your part too. The courage it took to disappear to protect yourself, it mattered. More than you realize." They sat together, sipping coffee in a rare moment of peace. Outside, the world carried on, unaware of the drama that had unfolded. The justice delivered quietly but decisively. Margaret felt a sense of closure she had not anticipated. It wasn't revenge or vindication. It was the knowledge that she had acted with integrity, intelligence, and courage, protecting the people she loved and helping others along the way. Margaret spent the following days coordinating with federal authorities, carefully reviewing each piece of evidence. She had already provided copies of Stephanie and David's signed documents, and now every phone call, every in-person meeting, was a delicate dance to ensure nothing was missed. It was exhausting, but for the first time in weeks, she felt fully in control. Danny, meanwhile, was cautiously optimistic. Each day he returned to normal routines felt like reclaiming a piece of himself that had been threatened but never truly lost. He spent long evenings with Margaret, discussing what had happened, analyzing Stephanie's manipulations, and understanding just how deep the deception had been. "It's surreal," he said one evening, "to realize someone could play such a role in your life, and you wouldn't even see it coming." Margaret nodded, her thoughts echoing his. "People aren't always what they seem," she said. "But recognizing the signs, trusting your instincts, and acting decisively, that's what keeps you safe." Despite the intense weeks, Margaret found solace in small routines. Mornings at the library, afternoons volunteering with community programs, evenings spent cooking or reading with Danny. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary. The weight of fear had lifted, replaced with a quiet sense of purpose. She even began drafting a guide for seniors, detailing how to spot fraud, safeguard assets, and work with legal and financial professionals. She wanted others to have the knowledge she had acquired, to prevent anyone from being manipulated as she and Danny had been. 3 weeks after the arrests, a federal press release confirmed the scope of the investigation. Stephanie and her associates faced charges for 23 felonies across 6 states. Evidence linked them to a network of property fraud schemes targeting elderly victims, and over $40 million in stolen assets had been recovered. Margaret read through the public report, her heart swelling with satisfaction. Justice had not only been served, but a network of criminals dismantled, all thanks to her foresight and planning. The days following the press release were bittersweet. While the danger had passed, the psychological impact lingered. Margaret and Danny spent hours discussing how to process what had happened, how to rebuild a sense of normalcy. "I feel like I've aged a decade in weeks," Danny admitted one evening, rubbing his temples. Margaret chuckled softly, a rare sound of levity. "I think you'll find strength in the years to come, the same way I did. What we survived isn't just about danger. It's about growth, resilience, and clarity." Meanwhile, Margaret began hearing from friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives who had learned about the events. Some shared stories of similar scams. Others offered gratitude for exposing the criminals. Margaret realized that her experience could help protect many more people if she chose to leverage it. She began holding informal workshops at the library and senior centers, teaching the basics of legal literacy, asset protection, and the psychology of deception. These sessions grew in popularity, and soon Margaret found herself a local authority on preventing elder fraud, a role she had never imagined taking on at this stage of life. Danny, too, found his path forward. He engaged with financial advisors, learning how to protect his assets and understand legal frameworks. He was more cautious now, but not cynical. He knew the value of trust but also the importance of verification. Margaret watched with pride as he reclaimed control over his life, becoming wiser, more discerning, and more confident in his decisions. One crisp autumn evening, Margaret and Danny sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Mom," Danny said softly, "I keep thinking about Stephanie and how close we came to losing everything. I can't stop thinking. What if we hadn't acted the way we did?" Margaret reached over, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We did act," she said. "Every step we took, every careful plan led us here. We can't rewrite the past, but we can control what we do next, and we did it brilliantly." The sense of empowerment was intoxicating. Margaret realized she had discovered a facet of herself she never knew existed. For 42 years, she had shaped young minds, instilling wisdom and critical thinking in her students. Tonight, she had used those same skills in real life, strategizing, anticipating, outmaneuvering criminals, and saved her family. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Teaching had been her life's work, but protecting and strategizing in the real world revealed her true capability. And the weeks that followed, Margaret received another letter from the federal prosecutor, detailing the outcomes of the initial court hearings. Stephanie and her associates had pled guilty to multiple charges, their sentences totaling decades of imprisonment. Victims across several states were scheduled to receive restitution, and Margaret's documentation and testimony had been central to the case. The impact of her careful planning was now public record, an undeniable testament to her courage, intelligence, and meticulous attention to detail. Danny approached Margaret one morning, holding the letter in hand. "Mom," he said, "you didn't just protect me. You protected dozens of people, maybe even hundreds. Your work matters." Margaret smiled, touched but modest. "We both played our parts," she said. "But yes, it does matter. And that's something to hold on to." As life gradually returned to normal, Margaret found a renewed sense of purpose. Volunteering at the library was no longer just a pastime. It became a platform for education, advocacy, and community engagement. She worked with local authorities to create resources for seniors, providing practical advice on avoiding scams and understanding legal protections. Her experience had taught her that knowledge was the greatest defense against manipulation, and she dedicated herself to sharing it. Danny, now more self-assured, resumed his life with a new perspective. He approached relationships and business dealings with caution but not fear. The lessons he had learned from his mother's resilience and his own experiences gave him clarity and strength. He remained close to Margaret, drawing wisdom from her and providing her with companionship, support, and love. A partnership forged not just by blood, but by survival and trust. By the end of the month, Margaret felt a profound sense of closure. The threats were gone, the criminals imprisoned, the property secure, and Danny safe. More than that, she had discovered her own power, resilience, and capacity to act decisively under pressure. Her life, which had once felt quiet and predictable, had been transformed by circumstances she never sought, but ultimately, she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. In reflecting on the journey, Margaret understood a vital truth. Underestimation, fear, and manipulation could be turned into tools of empowerment. By anticipating every move, staying patient, and acting decisively, she had rewritten the narrative of her life and ensured the safety of her family. It was a lesson not just for herself or Danny, but for anyone who believed that age, experience, or appearance limited one's capacity for action and intelligence. As she sipped her evening tea, Margaret looked out over the quiet neighborhood, her thoughts on the future. There would be challenges, of course, life always presented them. But she now knew that fear was not a weakness and that careful strategy, courage, and resilience could overcome almost anything. Danny, seated beside her, mirrored her quiet reflection, the bond between mother and son stronger than ever. Together they had survived deception, betrayal, and danger, and had done so with grace, intelligence, and courage. Part 5 closed with a sense of triumph, not loud or dramatic, but profound and deeply satisfying. Margaret had not only protected her family and assets, but had also discovered a latent strength, a power she had never acknowledged in herself. And in that quiet triumph lay the promise of a future where knowledge, courage, and strategy would continue to guide them, ensuring that nothing, not even the most cunning of criminals, could threaten what they had fought so hard to protect. Margaret woke up to a crisp autumn morning, the kind that made the sky glow pale blue and the air smell faintly of fallen leaves. The events of the past week still felt surreal. She poured herself a cup of coffee, carrying it to the porch where Danny was already seated, reviewing documents from his business. The serenity of the morning contrasted sharply with the chaos they had survived, and Margaret allowed herself a moment to savor it. Danny looked up from his papers, a soft smile on his face. "Mom, can you believe how far we've come?" he asked. Margaret shook her head. "It feels like a different life, but the lessons stay. Trust your instincts, plan carefully, and never underestimate yourself. Danny nodded, absorbing the wisdom that had saved them both. I've been thinking, he said, about what comes next. Stephanie and her crew are behind bars, but there are still so many vulnerable people out there. Margaret smiled knowingly. She had already started a plan for outreach, but hearing it from Danny reinforced her sense of purpose. That's exactly why we're going to expand what we've started. Education, awareness, prevention. People need tools, not just stories. By mid-morning, Margaret and Danny were at the library, organizing materials for a new workshop aimed at seniors. Margaret had already drafted a curriculum. Recognizing scams, understanding legal documents, protecting assets, and building networks of support. Flyers were printed, community leaders contacted, and a small group of volunteers gathered. Margaret addressed the volunteers, sharing her experience, not as a tale of fear, but as a lesson in empowerment. Knowledge is the first line of defense, she said, and courage is the bridge that connects knowledge to action. We have a chance to protect our neighbors before they become victims. Meanwhile, Danny worked behind the scenes, establishing a partnership with local law enforcement and financial institutions. His focus was on practical tools, how to verify documents, conduct basic legal checks, and report suspicious activity efficiently. Margaret observed him with pride. The boy who had once been naive and trusting was now a young man whose insight and strategic thinking complemented her own. Over the next few weeks, their workshops expanded in scope and reach. Seniors from neighboring towns attended, eager to learn. Margaret's lectures blended practical advice with personal anecdotes, using her story as a case study for how even well-educated, experienced individuals could be targeted, and how vigilance and action could reverse the threat. Danny held breakout sessions, teaching attendees about document analysis, red flags in financial transactions, and the importance of immediate reporting. Together, they created a community of informed, empowered individuals, each member now better equipped to protect themselves and others. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Margaret and Danny reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd reacted differently? Danny asked. Margaret smiled softly. Every day, but I try not to dwell on the past. What matters is what we do next. Our choices define us more than the threats we face. Danny nodded, his gaze thoughtful. I'm proud of us, Mom. Not just for surviving, but for turning fear into action. Life began to settle into a rhythm. Margaret continued her volunteer work, now infused with a sense of mission beyond her initial expectations. Danny resumed his business with renewed caution and discernment, integrating the lessons he had learned into every decision. Their bond, strengthened by shared adversity, became the foundation for a life built on trust, strategy, and mutual respect. Months passed, and the federal case against Stephanie and her associates concluded with lengthy sentences. The media highlighted Margaret's and Danny's roles in exposing the fraud, framing them as heroes in a story of intelligence, courage, and perseverance. Margaret found the attention humbling. She had never sought recognition, only resolution and justice. But the positive impact, both in reclaiming stolen assets and preventing future victimization, was undeniable. Amid the public recognition, Margaret received a personal letter from Marcus, her trusted lawyer and friend. He praised her ingenuity, foresight, and strategic brilliance. You took every challenge, anticipated every move, and orchestrated a plan that even the most experienced legal minds would admire, he wrote. Margaret kept the letter, a quiet reminder that age and experience, when combined with intellect and courage, could accomplish extraordinary feats. One afternoon, Margaret and Danny sat together, reviewing the final restitution reports. Families who had lost everything had been compensated, and many of the criminal network's assets were now returned to the victims. Margaret felt a profound sense of closure. She looked at Danny, who was reviewing a checklist of outreach initiatives, and realized that this was not just the end of a nightmare, but the beginning of a legacy. Their efforts would continue to protect, educate, and empower, extending far beyond their immediate circle. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the porch, Margaret reflected on the journey. The fear, the deception, the danger. It had all tested her, shaped her, and ultimately revealed her inner strength. She had learned that intelligence, courage, and patience were not just tools in a classroom, but weapons in the real world. More importantly, she had seen Danny grow into a man who could navigate challenges with wisdom and discernment. Margaret sipped her tea, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "We did it, Danny," she said softly. "We survived, we protected what matters, and we turned adversity into action." Danny reached across, squeezing her hand. "And we'll keep doing it, Mom. Together." The story of Margaret and Danny Walsh, once a tale of deceit, danger, and fear, had transformed into one of empowerment, courage, and triumph. Their lives, once threatened by greed and manipulation, now stood as a testament to the power of strategic thinking, vigilance, and the unbreakable bond between parent and child. Margaret had discovered not just her capacity to protect, but the broader mission of sharing that knowledge to safeguard others. Danny had found resilience, wisdom, and a renewed sense of purpose and the quiet that followed. As stars began to appear overhead, Margaret allowed herself a final deep breath of relief. The world was safe again, not just for them, but for the countless others who would benefit from their experience. And in that moment, she understood a truth she had always taught her students. Sometimes the greatest lessons in life come not from the classroom, but from the courage to act when it matters most. The funeral may have been fake, the threats terrifying, and the criminals cunning, but the resurrection of trust, safety, and self-belief had been beautifully, powerfully real.